Working of the Constitution. Introduction to the working of the Constitution. Oh, you're wondering, what is this ink mark on my forefinger, aren't you? Well, it's a sign that I have casted my vote and made my voice heard, even without uttering a word. What I did today is termed as exercising one's franchise. Exercising one's franchise is defined as the right to vote in state and national elections, which has been granted to all citizens above the age of 18 years of a country, irrespective of gender, religion, economic status, etc. This right has been granted to us, Indians, by the Government of India, because it has been enshrined in the Constitution of India. While studying the subjects, political science and civics, you all must have got an overview of various aspects of the Indian Constitution, such as the local government, values and philosophies, etc., along with various governing structures created by the very same, whilst throwing light on India's current standing on an international level. The Indian Constitution had declared its objective of establishing a sovereign, democratic republic. Furthermore, it also made provisions to ensure that citizens would be able to secure justice whilst safeguarding their freedom. The Indian Constitution also acted as a means through which a progressive and developed society based on social justice and equality was to be established. Did you know that the Constitution of India came into effect from 26th January 1950 CE, and since then, the government has been functioning in accordance with the principles enshrined in this document? It may also interest you to know that the Constitution of India has drawn extensively from existing Western legal traditions in its outline of the principles of liberal democracy. The Constitution of India was influenced by the British parliamentary pattern of a lower house and upper house, known as the House of Commons and House of Lords respectively, with India establishing its own variation, which we know today as the Lok Sabha, which is the House of the People, and the Rajya Sabha, which is the Council of the States. It also embodied the concept of fundamental rights, which was similar to the one seen in the Bill of Rights declared in the Constitution of the United States, whilst borrowing the concept of the establishment of a Supreme Court from the USA as well. India borrowed the concept of a federal system, wherein residual powers of legislation were retained by the central government from Canada. The concept of the Constitution providing detailed lists of division of powers between central and state governments was influenced from the Constitution of Australia, while that of the directive principles of state policy was borrowed from the Constitution of Ireland. Wasn't that some really helpful information regarding our Constitution? Now, with no further ado, let me help you take a look at the widening nature of the Indian democracy, important changes that have taken place in its political process, and the steps taken to establish social justice and equality. While doing so, we shall primarily focus on the following three aspects, namely democracy, social justice, and judicial system. Democracy. I'm sure you must be familiar with various definitions of democracy, such as a government under the direct or representative rule of the people of its jurisdiction, and the ever popular government of the people, by the people, and for the people, coined by Mr. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States of America. We should focus on the various factors that have helped preserve this sacred institution called democracy. Political maturity. Democracy does not merely imply a representative structure. Rather, the essence of representative system was the integration of its underlying principles, that is, popular sovereignty, limited government, separation of powers, checks and balances, judicial review, federalism in real-life scenarios. Once this task was successfully achieved, democracy would become an integral part of political life in the society. According to the Constitution of India, Indian citizens have direct representation in the country's parliament, state legislatures, and local governments. The increasing participation of people in the political processes proves that Indian democracy has become successful to a great extent. Holding free and fair elections at regular intervals is a chief indicator of India's successful democracy. Right to vote. During the pre-independence period of India, several provisions were in existence that restricted the right to vote. Following the attainment of independence, however, all such provisions were annulled and the Indian Constitution guaranteed adult suffrage by granting the right to vote to both men and women on equal basis from above 21 years of age, which was further reduced to 18 years of age, thereby giving the emerging younger generation in India an opportunity to participate in the political framework of the country. Such provisions eventually transformed India into one of the largest democracies in the world. Today, India has the largest number of eligible and registered voters as compared to any other democratic nation in the world. This change was not only quantitative in nature, but qualitative as well, as new political parties soon emerged with the active participation of these young group of voters. These parties represented different expectations of people, while at the same time furthered competition in the political sphere. Decentralization of democracy. Decentralization of power is an essential characteristic of a democratic government. Decentralization controls any prospective abuse of power by the government or its agencies, whilst creating opportunities for political participation for the common people. The directive principles of state policy includes the provisions for democratic decentralization. One such important provision is in regards to the empowerment of local self-governing institutions, which would turn the dream of ideal democratic governance into a reality. After independence, several attempts were made for democratic decentralization in this direction. One such important attempt was the 73rd and 74th Amendments to the Indian Constitution in 1992 CE, which gave a constitutional status to local self-governing institutions whilst increasing their powers. Right to Information, RTI, 2005. Citizen empowerment is the essential condition of a successful democracy. On that note, it was necessary to create opportunities for citizens' participation and interaction with the government. There should not be any sort of communication gap between the citizens and the government. An increased communication between the citizens and the government helps in strengthening democracy and helps establish a bond of trust between the two entities. Citizens have the right to know about the functioning and activities of the government. The Government of India introduced the right to information to Indian citizens to ensure transparency and accountability, which are the hallmarks of a good governance. Right to information led to the government in becoming more transparent, thereby reducing the element of secrecy in its functioning. After the year 2000 CE, the whole approach towards democratic reforms, which are considered as rights of citizens, underwent a drastic change. Accordingly, citizens in India had obtained the right to information, education, and food security. These rights have strengthened democracy in India. In the decades following independence, progress was made towards more democratization of India. However, in the process, citizens were considered as beneficiaries. In the last few decades, developments were considered as rights of the citizens. Social justice and equality. Social justice and equality are the important objectives of the Constitution of India, with certain guidelines provided to establish a new society on the basis of these two values. We, Indians, as citizens, were to follow this path in order to successfully achieve this goal. In order to establish social justice, it was necessary for the removal of those social conditions which were responsible for injustice. At the same time, insistence on the equality of dignity of all individuals was equally necessary as well. The principles of justice and equality aimed at ending discrimination in social status on grounds of superior or inferior, caste, religion, language and gender, place of birth, race, property, etc., and providing an equality opportunity for the development of every individual. Also, efforts made by the government through its policies to establish justice and equality was important. Equal efforts were also needed to be made at all levels of society. For instance, for democracy to be truly complete, one must try to bring all sections of the society into the mainstream. Democracy is, in fact, a process of accommodating different sections of the society, thereby reducing social conflicts. Let me also tell you about the steps undertaken by the Indian government in order to bring about social justice and equality. Policy of reservation of seats. The policy of reservation of seats was meant for those sections of society who had been deprived opportunities for education and employment for a very long period. In that regard, some seats were kept reserved for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in educational institutions and government services. There is also a provision of reservation of seats for the other backward classes, that is, OBCs. Scheduled Castes and Tribes Prevention of Atrocities Act. Prevention of Atrocities Act was a very important act established for the attainment of social justice and equality. This act prevented the affliction of injustice against people belonging from scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, and any act of atrocity committed against them was liable for punishment. The following efforts were undertaken to prevent atrocities against people belonging from scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. 1. Abolition of untouchability. 2. Protection from social injustice and various forms of exploitation. 3. Throwing open to them religious institutions of public character. 4. Removal of restrictions on their access to wells, tanks, shops, restaurants and roads, etc. 5. Give them the right to move freely and acquire property. 6. Give them the right of admission to educational institutions and receiving grants out of state funds. 7. Permitting the state governments to make reservation for them in services. 8. Give them special representations in the Lok Sabha and the Vidhan Sabha respectively. 9. Setting up separate departments and advisory councils to promote their welfare and safeguard their interests. 10. Prohibiting forced labor. And 11. Making special provision for the administration and control of the scheduled areas. Provision for minorities. The Indian Constitution made several provisions for the protection of minorities. Several policies were also adopted by the government to provide minorities opportunities in the field of education and employment. As mentioned earlier, the Constitution prohibited discrimination on the basis of caste, religion, race, language, and region. The comprehensive provisions for minorities introduced in the Constitution fundamentally protected their right to equality, freedom, right against exploitation, and cultural and educational rights. Laws relating to women and provisions for representation. During the post-independence period, efforts were made for women empowerment. Taking into consideration numerous problems faced by women, several policies had been adopted at national and international levels to eradicate illiteracy among women and make available various opportunities for their development. Right to have an equal share in the property of father and husband, Dowry Prohibition Act, Sexual Harassment Act, Domestic Violence Prohibition Act, etc. are some important provisions which created a favorable atmosphere for the protection of freedom of women and securing their development. In India, from the very beginning, women had less representation in politics and political institutions. Many countries in the world had made efforts to increase representation of women. From this perspective, changes were taking place in India as well. The 73rd and 74th Amendments, 1992 CE, reserved 33% of seats for women in local self-governing institutions. This percentage had been raised to 50% in several states, including Maharashtra. The chart gives us the detailed description of the representation of women in the Lok Sabha. Number, year, number of women MPs or Member of Parliaments. Percentage 1. 1951-52 22. 4.50%. 2. 1957 22. 4.45%. 3. 1962 31. 6.28%. 4. 1967 29. 5.58%. 5. 1971 28. 5.41%. 6. 1977 19. 3.51%. 7. 1980 28. 5.29%. 8. 1984 43. 7.95%. 9. 1989 29. 5.48%. 10. 1991 39. 7.30%. 11. 1996 40. 7.37%. 12. 1998 43. 7.92%. 13. 1999 49. 9.02%. 14. 2004 45. 8.29%. 15. 2009 59. 10.87%. 16. 2014 66. 12.15%. A National Commission for Women has been established, with similar commissions also established at state levels. The Protection of Women Against Domestic Violence Act was an important step undertaken in the direction of upholding the sanctity of democracy. This act underlined the need to protect the prestige and self-esteem of a woman. This act rejected traditional forms of domination and authoritarianism and expanded the scope of Indian democracy to make it inclusive in a true sense. Role of judiciary. The judiciary in India has played an important role in strengthening democracy and achieving the objectives of social justice and equality. While interpreting the provisions of the Constitution, the judiciary has always taken into consideration the fundamental objectives along with intentions of the framers of the Constitution. Let me make you understand the contribution of judiciary in this regard by reviewing the following points. The basic framework of the Constitution. The Constitution was dynamic in nature. That is, it was a living document. The Constitution would change according to changing conditions in the political sphere, and the Parliament was the institution that had the power to make those changes. The judiciary accepted these changes made by the Constitution, but at the same time, it specified the limitations on the implementation of these powers. The judiciary took a stand that while amending the Constitution, the Parliament cannot alter its basic structure, which generally included the following provisions. Republican and democratic form of government. Federal structure of the government. Promotion of unity and integrity of the nation. Sovereignty of the nation. Secularism and supremacy of the Constitution. Significant judicial decisions. The protection of citizens' rights, guaranteed according to provisions of fundamental rights of the Constitution, was strengthened through various decisions undertaken by the judiciary. For example, with the declaration of triple talaq as unconstitutional, the judiciary had protected the honor and prestige of women. By recognizing the right to privacy as an important right of citizens, the judiciary extended the scope of individual freedom. Furthermore, the judiciary has made several efforts towards environmental protection, protection of human rights, protection of rights of children, tribal empowerment, and protection of interests of the transgender community. With the passage of time, these efforts resulted in the Indian political process becoming more mature. For instance, in 2017 CE, in a historical judgment made by the Supreme Court of India, headed by a 9-judge constitutional bench comprised of Justice Khehar, J. Jelameshwar, S. A. Bobde, R. K. Agarwal, R. F. Nariman, A. M. Sapre, D. Y. Chandrachud, Sanjay K. Kaul, and S. Abdul Nazir. The right to privacy was declared as a fundamental right, which was protected under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. This judgment dealt a severe blow to the Aadhaar system, as the central government now has to convince the Supreme Court that forcing citizens to give a sample of their fingerprints and their iris scan did not violate one's privacy. Democracy requires good governance and equally efficient governing practices. So, what are these good governing practices? Let me tell you. Accountable or responsible government. Effective and efficient government. Responsive government. Transparency in working of the government. Just and all-inclusive development. People's participation in governing and decision-making process. Conclusion. We reviewed the foundation of the Indian Constitution and the working of the government on the basis of the very same, in the context of India's democracy. However, numerous acts and policies implemented by the government did not translate to a permanent end to prevalent problems. There are several new problems that confronted present-day society. However, even in such a bleak situation, the people of India had not failed to develop a democratic mindset. We shall soon also learn about the history of the election process in India.